I'm going to get us started. So I just want to welcome everyone to this evening's conversation. This is our first Climate Voice episode kicking off 2022. So, again, Happy New Year to everyone. This is our first event in Twitter Spaces, so we're very excited to be here. We are led by Bill Weil, who is up here on the stage with me, Bill Weil, who spearheaded sustainability at Google and Facebook, then left big tech to push for greater climate action on policy and founded Climate Voices in 2020. So, this show is a fantastic series of urgent conversations with people at the forefront of solving the climate crisis. And past episodes have featured award winning innovator Saul Griffith, environmental journalist Emily Atkin, and renowned climatologist Michael Mann, to name but a few. I am Andrea Soccorso. It's nice to meet all of you and so great to see many of you again. I'm the co-host and moderator of Climate Voices this evening and co-founder of After We Vote, which is a pro-democracy civic engagement policy group. I also want to shout out Jennifer Allen here, up here with me, Climate Voices Director of Programs and Campaigns, who will be joining us tonight, and also to co-producer Sarah Keller, and I'd be remiss in not shouting out Virginia Witt as well, Head of Communications for Climate Voice. We are thrilled to have this important, timely conversation with climate scientist and leading climate voice, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, author of Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world. There has never been a more important time for this book. I would urge you all to buy it. I'm going to ask Sarah, if you have a moment when you get a chance, if you can pin the link to Dr. Hayhoe's book, that would be fantastic. Tonight, this evening, we're going to explore which climate policies work, why now is a time actually for optimism, and how you can use your voice to drive change. We are going to run for 60 minutes, which will start with a 20-minute discussion led by Bill and Jennifer with Dr. Hayhoe, and then we're going to open up to our special guests to deepen the conversation. And so tonight we are excited to have these amazing leader and activists. And so please join me in acknowledging Rabbi Jenny Rosen, who's the founder of uh, Dayenu, and please correct me, I hope I got the pronunciation right, which is a Jewish call to climate action. And we have Wes Gobar, coalition's lead at Evergreen Action. And we have with us Mick Sheldrick, the co founder and chief policy impact and government affairs officer for the amazing Global Citizen. We have Eliza Nemser, the executive director of Climate Change Makers, which is a 501c4 focused on advocating for climate candidates and climate policies via their weekly hours of action. And I'm not sure if she's with us yet, but we will be hopefully joined by Dr. Shetta Chakraborty, who is a climate scientist as well, and the president of the very exciting solutions-oriented We Don't Have Time network that came out of Europe, out of Sweden. So finally, a very big thanks to you in the audience for spending your time with us this evening. I believe Sweta has just arrived, so we'll mic her up, and so excited to have her here. She has lots of exciting things to share. Before I pass the mic to Bill and Jennifer to take us away, I'd just like to set a few additional words of context. None of us need a reminder that climate crisis is here and now and impacting us daily. It is making headlines every day. Severe weather, record droughts, floods, and heat, and flight cancellations. It's impacting all of us, but sadly, it's not. Not all of us are experiencing the impacts of climate change equally. Federal climate policy in the United States is now dangling by a thread. For millions, the recently released and among the most recently watched films on Netflix, Don't Look Up, with its dark humor, reminded us that we actually must look up and face climate reality and get moving. But there are real reasons for hope in 2022. Young people and climate activists are raising their voices louder than ever before and growing in numbers. In the US, Gen Z is the largest voting bloc, according to recent NPR polls, and world leaders are taking them more seriously, and they are serious about climate change. The US returned to COP26, and world leaders got us back on a track towards global cooperation, keeping 1.5-degree target of warming alive, but with country commitments for carbon reduction coming in slightly above that. But world leaders are set to again much sooner than ever before, just again this year at Sharm el Sheikh at COP27. So climate change has also taken hold in the media, policy debates, corporate policies, investing, and yes, in pop culture. And the call to climate justice and equity is being heard. The links to health and future pandemics are being made. And the need to place vulnerable communities at the center of our solutions is more and more being acknowledged. We know that we have more to do and we need to accelerate action urgently, but it's an exciting time of opportunity to innovate, design, build, and drive change, and we can do it together. Everyone has one question about climate. What can I do? That brings us to tonight's special guest. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Bill, to take us away.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andrea. And folks, you'll notice that my voice is quite slow. I've got an issue with my throat. I'm doing fine. So thanks for bearing with me. And I'm very eager to hear from Katharine. So, Katharine, let's just jump right in. Can you talk about why you really focus on hope and optimism and why despair is such a destructive trend?
Thank you, Bill. It is so great to be here with you and with everyone here on Twitter. And I wanted to start off by talking about a trend that I have seen emerging here on Twitter and in social media, as well as in one-on-one conversations over the last year that's been accelerating. And it's the trend of deciding that it's time to give up. And here's the thing. If we decide that we're doomed, we are. If we decide that there is nothing that we can do to tackle the climate crisis, then there isn't. If we decide that it's too late, then it is. But hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is not thinking, if I just close my eyes and wish hard enough, maybe someone will fix this for me. Hope begins from that dark place that we are in, recognizing that we are conducting an unprecedented experiment with the only home that we have. And it is bad and it will get worse. But hope tells us that there is the possibility of a better future. If we do everything we can tackle the climate crisis. And along with it, we can tackle a lot of the inequalities and injustices in this world that we're already fighting, that we won't be able to fix if we don't fix the climate crisis too. So hope is that possibility that if we do something, it will make a difference. And without that hope, there is no point to action. And so that's why hope is absolutely essential to everything that we do.
Katharine, it's Jennifer. Thank you so much for that. And you are famously known as an optimist, but it's trying times right now for those of us following the national climate policy debates in DC right now. Where do you find your optimism, and what's your optimism to pessimism ratio as you look at the policy debate on climate?
Well, I have to say that you put your finger on the most pessimistic of my optimism to pessimism ratio right there. Federal policy in the United States with a Congress that just can't get along, where some people, it seems like, would just rather cut off their nose to spite their face than possibly agree with someone. That is one of the most frustrating arenas when we're looking at climate action. But we don't have to only depend on federal policy because there is so much else going on. If we look at what many large corporations are doing, and I was at COP in Glasgow in November, and for me, it was so encouraging to see the IKEAs, the Nestle's, yes, even the Amazons of the world there, because they want to take serious climate action. And they, thanks to the many voices that have been raised, pushing them in that direction, they truly do have actionable goals. When we look at big cities around the world, often they're leading as well, regardless of their politics. When we look at nonprofits, when we look at universities and schools, tribal nations, indigenous peoples, there is so much climate action already happening that the federal government will be forced to come along, whether it likes it or not. And of course, we hope that it will take this chance that it has before it with the Build Back Better bill to truly show leadership. But make no mistake, the world is changing. And I have to say, earlier today, I had the honor of being the inaugural speaker on the federal sustainability seminar series. So the federal government, which is, they own the largest fleet of vehicles in the whole US, 600,000 vehicles. They own 300,000 buildings. They're the largest landowner and they're the largest user of electricity in the United States, the federal government. They have a sustainability plan to be carbon zero, and they have individual yearly goals. So it isn't just setting a goal for 2035, it's setting a goal for this year and for next year and for the year after that. And they are going to be able not only to make a big dent in their carbon footprint, so to speak, their actual emissions, they're going to have a huge impact through their climate shadow, so to speak, the way that we influence others, the way that we jumpstart markets that bring down the prices of EVs or encourage people to continue to develop clean energy, or say, hey, if the federal government can do that, why can't we do that too? So there is action happening. But when we look specifically at what's happening in Congress, that truly is the most discouraging part of it. And it's the place where we have to fight the hardest, isn't it?
Absolutely. And as Bill founded Climate Voice really to empower employees to push for climate action at work, to sort of raise their voice and try to use their influence with that identity. And you talk so much in the book about using your voice as the most powerful thing that each of us can do. So can you just talk about why that's important and how people can think about the circles of influence that they have in their everyday life and how they can catalyze action?
Yes. So often I'm asked, and often this happens right here on Twitter, should we be focusing more on individual action or on system wide change? And my answer to that question is yes. Why is that? Because a system is made up of people. How does a system change if individuals don't engage with it to advocate for that change? Why do big corporations like Microsoft have carbon negative goals? Why is Amazon deciding to replace its fleet with electric vehicles? Why are companies like Nestle and IKEA so committed to engaging in issues of not just clean energy, but climate justice as well? It isn't because, in most cases, I don't want to generalize across everywhere, but in most cases, it's not because the CEO or the board of directors just woke up one morning and decided that's what they needed to do. In most cases, it is because employees, it is because people they knew, it is because investors, it's because people, ordinary people, use their voices to advocate for change in the place where they work, in the city where they live, in the neighborhood where they are, in the organization that they're part of. Whoever we are, we're all part of circles of influence that are greater than ourselves. We live somewhere, we work somewhere, we might study somewhere, we might worship somewhere, we might be part of an organization like a Rotary Club or an ultimate frisbee team or a yoga studio. We are all part of organizations that are greater than ourselves. And when we are, in the words of Bill McKibben, when we do the most important thing we can do as an individual today, which is not be such an individual, when we use our voices to advocate for larger change, the impact can be magnified by a factor of 10, 100, or even 1,000. Imagine, putting solar panels on our own home versus actually getting our organization to put solar panels on their roof. the order of magnitude is exponential, and we influence and alter our social norms through doing so.
Yeah, that's so inspiring. And your book is filled with inspiring stories about how you talk to and engage with people who really disagree with you and particularly disagree with you publicly on social media. And can you share with folks who haven't read the book yet sort of your most persuasive strategies for changing hearts and minds? Because I feel like people are reluctant to talk about climate because it seems like we're just going to get into a big fight.
Absolutely. So my book is called Saving Us. And the reason I wrote it is because for the last 3 or 4 years, I have heard the same two questions wherever I go, whoever I'm speaking to. And the two questions are, what gives you hope? And how can I have a conversation about this? Because 70% of people in the United States are already worried about climate change. And in other countries, it's even more. But we don't talk about this issue because it's depressing, because we don't want to pick another fight, because we don't even really know what to say. But ironically, talking about it is the first most important step that we all need to do. Because how can we act about something? How can we do anything about anything? Why would we even understand why we care and what we can do if we don't begin by talking about it? So I'm not talking about the science and the Greenland ice sheet and methane emissions. I'm talking about, why does it matter to me who I am in the places where I live? Why does it matter to me where I live in Texas? Why does it matter to me as a mother? Why does it matter to me as someone who really enjoys skiing and wants to make sure there's snow to do that? Why does it matter to me as a person of faith? So in my book, I encourage people, take an inventory of who you are. Inventory who you love, where you love, what you love. And then when you talk about climate change, look for others who share those with you and begin your conversation with something that you agree with them on, not something you disagree with them on. In my book, I have many examples of how you can begin conversations with a shared love of beer or knitting or birding or the fact that you're both members of the Rotary Club. Begin the conversation with something you share, connect the dots to how climate change is affecting what you both care about, and then always, always bring up a positive, constructive solution that you're doing or that they could do or that an organization is doing or that someone on the other side of the world is doing or someone right where you live is doing. Because the two biggest things we're missing are an understanding of why it matters to me, not why it matters in general to life on Earth, but why does it matter to me and what can be done to fix it. And that's why those are the two most important things that we can talk about.
I was struck in reading your book that you are such a deeply accomplished scientist who is also very committed to your religious faith as a Christian. And as you know, science and religion are often framed as sort of oppositional, and yet you defy that. And I wonder what advice you have for our audience about how do we bridge that gap, which in our own communities often feels like a stumbling block to this conversation.
Unfortunately, it really is in the United States, and it's starting to spread to other countries as well. Because if you take your faith seriously, and this is true for Christianity, which is my own faith, as well as for pretty much almost any major world religion, if you take your faith seriously, there are core tenets of that faith that advocate for care or responsibility or good stewardship of nature, and for caring for those who are less fortunate than us, the people who are already marginalized or vulnerable today, who are most impacted by a changing climate. Those are core values of most people on this planet and core values of most religions and faith traditions on this planet. Yet somehow in the United States, Christianity has gotten completely turned around to where rather than being recognized by our love for others, as it literally says in the Bible, Jesus said Christians to be recognized by their love for others, Christians are often recognized for exactly the opposite. And it is a very sad truth that in the United States now, 40% of people who call themselves evangelical Christians don't even go to church. So how would they even know what the Bible says? So where are they getting their statement of belief from? They're getting it from their political ideology. And for many, if their statement of faith written by their political ideology comes in conflict with their theology, they'll go with politics over what the Bible says. But for those who do take their faith seriously, that's a great place to start the conversation if that's something that you share and that you respect. If that is not something you share, then look for something else you have in common. And if you don't know what that is, then ask questions and get to know the person or the people first, rather than just making the assumption that they have to care for the same reason you do. Often, we try to change people's hearts because we don't think that they care about things, or that they have the right values or the right morals. But most people already have values and they have morals, and they might be different than ours, but they might already give them every reason they need to care about climate change. So we aren't trying to change people's hearts. We're trying to show them how the heart they already have, everything, everyone, every place they already love, already gives them every reason they need to care about climate change. And in fact, they are already the perfect person to care about climate change. And if they engage in and support climate action, it will enable them to be an even better expression of who they already are, whether that is a better Christian or a better parent or a better Rotarian or a better supporter of their country or a shrewder business person. Whoever they are, climate action can help them, again, express their own values in a more genuine way. And that's our goal, is to help them do that.
Amen. I'm in. So now I want to turn it to Bill before we go back to Andrea and our panelists and bring in some other voices. But Bill, why should employees in particular care about climate, and how can they unlock the influence of their employer?
Yeah, well, I think it's been clear since I started working on climate 16 years ago at Google that employee sentiment is driving, as Katharine said, a lot of what companies are doing. And young people in particular tend to be very passionate about climate. What we've seen in the last 6 months is employees beginning to speak up and thanking their companies for the amazing things that are doing, like Microsoft's carbon negative goals, for example, but then calling on them to step up and lean in the public policy battles so we can drive the broad systemic change we need. And Katharine, I think I would ask you what advice you have for helping people reframe the conversation from primarily being about how does acting on climate benefit me or my company, to the broader thing you were discussing around really caring for others, caring for the community, and so on.
Yes, climate change affects all of us. And it affects us already today where we live. One of the biggest ways it's affecting us is through loading the weather dice against us. It's taking naturally occurring events like heat waves and floods and hurricanes and storms and wildfires, and it's exacerbating them, making them worse. Wildfires burning greater area, choking the sky with smoke, um, like in Colorado recently. Massive tornado outbreaks in December, which is traditionally the lowest month of the year for that type of activity. Supersized hurricanes dropping record-breaking amounts of rain. These issues can push us apart or they can bring us together. and often in communities that are enduring the same impacts, we see people coming together. We see people supporting each other. We see people realizing that we are not only individuals, we are part of something greater than ourselves. We are part of a community, which could be a physical community or a virtual community. We are part of a city or a state or a region. We're part of a sector. We're part of a supply chain. COVID has really brought in how dependent we are on supply chains to all of us. We are all interconnected in this world, all nearly 8 billion of us. And we sink or swim together. And so that's why this really is about saving us, all of us. And to do so, we can't do that alone. We have to do it together. And by doing so with climate action, these actions, most times, they bring us closer together rather than driving us further apart. They encourage us to consider others rather than just considering ourselves. They help us look for benefits like greening low-income neighborhoods in urban cities that have been historically redlined, benefits that might benefit others initially, but also benefit us. And really, when we help others, that we help ourselves too. Um, for so long, we've been focused on ourselves, and I just feel like this is an opportunity to really look at, and this is why I'm a climate scientist myself, to really look at how can I do my best for all of our sisters and our brothers around the world, and for every living thing that shares this planet with us, because we are all part of this system. We all call this planet home, and the bottom line is, what we have in common is far more than what divides us.
So, one action that everyone on this conversation can do right now is sign our Climate Voice petition. It's called 1 in 5 for 1.5, and we're trying to urge the top US tech companies, so Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, to elevate climate advocacy as one of their top 5 priorities, to spend more resources, more investments on lobbying for climate and lobbying for climate policies that we need. So we would love everyone to sign it. Sarah's going to pin the tweet to go to our website, and please follow Climate Voice so that you can hear all of our campaigns and information as we try to really move the voice of employees to unlock the influence of corporations to help us win this climate battle. And with that, I want to turn it back to Andrea to welcome our panelists and get some more voices into this conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Katharine. I'm very excited about all the possibilities of what we can do, and I'm also very excited that you mentioned again the planet and our connection to the planet, and the fact that we that conservation is really coming back into the conversation and showing the interconnectedness, not just of us to each other, but also to the planet and to other species, is also a very exciting development. So thank you for sharing all of that. And now I'd like to turn to Rabbi Jenny Rosen. It's such a pleasure to meet you here this evening and to have you in this conversation. It would be lovely if you could describe the purpose of Dayanu, and please please make sure that that is correctly pronounced, and why you founded the organization.
Thanks so much. Such a pleasure to be here, and particularly with Katharine. It's pronounced Dayanu, and Dayanu is a new Jewish organization. We're mobilizing the American Jewish community to confront the climate crisis. We like to say with spiritual audacity and bold political action, holding many of the themes that Katharine spoke about in terms of both the urgency and the hope of this moment. So we are growing a Jewish climate movement that's spiritually rooted, multi-generational, and that centers justice. And we work in close partnership with other faith climate groups, with secular climate groups, with Jewish organizations. We understand ourselves really as just a small part of the much bigger movement. We founded Dayanu really to bring the full power and people of the Jewish community to the national climate movement, to show up as partners and as allies. One of my colleagues says, we have to go get our people. And so Dayanu is really about kind of bringing our people, as we all need every part of the diverse American community and global community to be bringing their people. So we are mobilizing on both a grassroots level and on an institutional level. We've been talking about companies, and there's also a lot of what I would call institutional power, which is not corporate power, but where many of the resources and political power rests also in institutions. So on a grassroots level, we have more than 90 Dayenu circles in different stages of formation since we formed about a year and a half ago. And these are groups of people across the country working on climate action in partnership with local groups and frontline communities, and engaging in local and national campaigns, really focused on systemic change. The aim is to ensure, are we doing everything in our power to contribute to reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions well before 2050, while building a just, equitable green energy economy? And the second part is really critical. What are we building? Katharine said, quoting Bill McKibben, one of my favorite frameworks, which is that the most important thing is to be less of an individual and join movements sharp enough to make change. How do we act collectively? So for Dayenu, this is really through 4 key strategies of systemic change, through advocating for comprehensive climate policy, like the Build Back Better Act that we've all been fighting for, mobilizing people in key political and movement moments. How do we really build our collective power? How do we leverage and change the political landscape? How do we press candidates and elected officials to take real action? And finally, how do we keep fossil fuels in the ground? How do we end the financing of the fossil fuel industry and block the fossil fuel infrastructure that continues to be built? So we launched Dayenu to give people pathways to take the kind of meaningful strategic action at the scale that science and justice demand. And also, I would add, to support them to face and move through the anxiety and the angst and all of the emotions that the climate crisis raises, and to confront that truth and to move into courageous action. So I'll just sort of close this response by saying we are in such a moment of profound urgency, but also, as Katharine spoke about so beautifully, a moment of profound possibility. And the name, to come back to the name of the organization, Dayenu, Dayenu is a joyful song of gratitude that Jews sing each year at the Passover Seder. And we retell the journey from slavery to freedom out of Egypt, and we recount all the things that God had done. We say, if God had taken us out of Egypt and not given us the Torah, Dayenu, it would have been enough. We named the organization Dayenu because it also means we've had enough. We've had enough destruction. We've had enough valuing fossil fuel companies over human life. We've had enough letting the impacts of climate destruction fall disproportionately on Black, Brown, Indigenous, poor, and marginalized communities. Dayenu, enough. But it's a double entendre, because it can also mean we have enough. We have what we need to confront the climate crisis and move towards climate solutions. We have the resources and the policy rubrics and the technology. We have the people and the power. We have what we need so that everyone can have enough. So this is really the time for us to join together so that all people and their children and their children's children can live with enough for generations to come.
I love that. Dayenu, enough. And this is a time of profound urgency, but profound possibility. Thank you for those amazing words. And I'd like to ask one other quick insight from you, Rabbi Jenny, if I may, before we move on to our other guests, which is, can you tell us briefly about the story when you hosted the rally in Prospect Park, which was focused on Chuck Schumer, who gave his speech at the event, and why was that an important milestone, since he's already a Build Back Better advocate?
Sure. So the rally that we held at Prospect Park, which for those of you who aren't New Yorkers, which is probably many of you, is a park in Brooklyn. So this fall, it was really, first of all, it's an example of what systemic change can look like. People gathering to call on their political electeds. So this was one of actually 16 actions that happened around the country as part of our Hear the Call campaign. So leading up to the high holidays, leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Dayenu activists organized public actions, bringing Jews and also other partners, other faith groups, to their senators' doorsteps. So we were in Prospect Park because that is right by Senator Schumer's doorstep, and calling on other senators with the blast of the shofar, with the ram's horn that's blown on Rosh Hashanah, calling them to have the courage and moral clarity to pass a just green recovery. So when we gathered at Prospect Park, Senator Schumer came. He came because there were a lot of different parts of the community represented. And it was important for him to see that this is something that the Jewish community and more broadly, many religious communities care about. Politically, I will say it was important because he actually said some things publicly, even though he's a supporter. He said some things publicly that he hadn't said before. He said that one of the things we need is deep tax breaks for wind and solar, and we need to take away all of the subsidies for oil, gas, and coal. So his saying that in that context was actually particularly valuable, and something we've been able to share and galvanize and share with our partners, and also really hold him accountable to. And finally, I'll just say, often people say, why is it worth talking to, advocating with, building relationships with my representatives? They're already on, as you said, our side. And I would say that this is a good example of where giving our representatives, in Hebrew we say chizuk, kind of reinforcement, strengths, to hold their ground, to not waver, to not dilute or delay or give into powerful corporate forces. And we're seeing that play out right now as we try to get Build Back Better across the finish line, how important it is to stand emboldened and strong in these moments. So our hope is that rally and Senator Schumer coming to join us will give him chizuk in this very critical moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Jen. I just want to check whether, Katharine, you might want to give a quick reply or comment there before I invite Wes to speak.
Well, I absolutely love that. And it tackles one of the misconceptions I often hear. People say, well, everybody in my bubble thinks the same way I do, so there's no point talking about this. And to that, I say, first of all, if you don't talk about it, how do you know? And second of all, most people are worried but not activated. And how are people activated? By having those conversations about what solutions look like and how each of us can add our hand to that giant boulder and get it rolling down the hill faster and faster. And I think that was a beautiful example of how even a political leader who is behind climate action can be encouraged to go further by having those conversations with people in his community.
Oh, and that is so important, especially right now in this moment when people might be feeling their voices aren't heard. With that, I'd like to turn to Wes Gobar from Evergreen Action. Wes, welcome, and do share with us your work at Evergreen Action and coalition building. And if you could share an insight on, the policy moment before us in Washington, D.C., and your reflections on that.
Sure. Andrea, Bill, Katharine, thank you so much for having me. Evergreen Action is a relatively new organization. We started in early 2020 and out of the Inslee for America campaign. The Inslee campaign staff had a really revolutionary idea, which was to run on climate exclusively. And so they did tons of outreach across the climate movement with environmental justice groups, with labor, with rural communities, and put out a really impressive set of plans that laid the groundwork for people to up their ambition. Because when one candidate started coming out with really comprehensive climate plans and started getting praise, then Biden and Bernie and Warren and Beto and all these other candidates, they said, well, we have to one up that. And that's kind of really important too, just when we're talking about individual action versus collective. When we start to get the ball rolling, people want to step up to the plate. And so I came on board with Evergreen when they finally became an actual organization at the start of 2020 and wanted to turn that influence and those plans into action. And so, there are a lot of groups that are working on policy papers and putting memos out, but we're really trying to turn movement energy into actionable policy based on standards, investments in justice, cross-cutting standards across polluting sectors, buildings, transportation, power, bold, massive public investments, and all the things that we really need, and environmental justice, which is really kind of a shift from climate policy that only focuses on one issue area, siloing it or thinking about it as just a kind of trying to pass market-based policies versus an investment from the government in the public good. And so we were working really heavily, engaging with the Biden team on the lead up to the election, on some of the stuff that would eventually become the Back Better plan, the American Jobs Plan. And Biden, the important thing is that Biden ran and won on climate. Climate was central to his agenda. There's tons of polling that says that Democratic voters overwhelmingly cared about climate. He stood at Flint, Michigan, where he probably won by like a percentage point or two in Michigan. If he stood in Flint and said he would have the most ambitious environmental justice agenda ever. And those are promises he's not going to be able to meet unless he passes the Build Back Better Act's climate investments, because there's some really exciting stuff in there. And people just talk about the big, it's a $1.7 trillion bill, when obviously climate cost is $140 billion last year. But they don't talk about is the clean energy tax credits, the rebates, the direct rebates are going to lower utility bills as we're building out utility scale solar, and building out community solar so people can share energy. It's going to have a civilian climate core so that people who are, didn't have the opportunity to go to college or dropped out of high school, or people who are formerly incarcerated, or have different documentation status, can now go out and get jobs making their communities better. Jobs helping to fight climate disasters, jobs, building solar panels or installing bike lanes. So, and then not only having good jobs, but pathways to union careers. It's also just the electric vehicle tax credits also these are union jobs in American manufacturing. More money for public transportation, more money for pollution reduction. So this is really exciting, and a green bank to mobilize states and communities for climate solutions and give them the money to do this to maximize their investments. So there's some really important stuff that Evergreen has been working really closely with with Congress and the Biden campaign to turn these into actual policies. And we're now at a moment where we have the Build Back Better is in a very precarious place. I'll say that we have 48 senators who are on board, who would be on board to pass, frankly, a $3.5 trillion package. But we do have 50 senators on board with the climate provisions. The climate provisions, they are, even Joe Manchin has come in agreement. He's even come out in support of the climate provisions. And so we know that, there's that these are investments that would benefit everyone. These are smart investments. But we need to find a vehicle to pass that. Whatever the legislation looks like moving forward, whatever forms of social programs would be in it, we know that these climate investments, Biden needs to be able to meet his promises to the international community, where he said that he would cut pollution in half by 2030. And if he wants to run in the midterms, he needs to be able to meet his communities at home, his commitments at home to act on climate, to have the most ambitious environmental justice agenda ever, because otherwise people will we're going to get wiped out in the midterms, and we need to get it done very soon. So where things just stand is that we just need to keep putting pressure on President Biden as well as Senator Schumer and congressional leaders to continue to make it a priority, because we can't just let this opportunity slide away, or get pushed off on the timetable of Washington, because those investments that I talked about are too important.
Thank you, Wes. And I think piggybacking on what Katharine had said earlier, I'd say also potentially pressures through any of your stakeholders in your network, like companies, um, where you have a relationship or a board membership, because she was very excited. We actually ran into each other at COP26. It was a very exciting moment for me outside the New York Times Climate Hub. Getting a quick hello and a photo with Professor Dr. Hayhoe. Very exciting moment. But Wes, could you, can I push you a little bit further to share, we've just celebrated Martin Luther King Day and his legacy and his fight for equality, justice, against poverty and labor rights. You mentioned jobs, good green jobs that are coming out of the bill. You did a great job of getting us excited about what's in that bill. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you think we can center climate justice, or how the bill is centering climate justice in the work ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up Dr. King, because I don't think many people realize that the last speech he gave before he was assassinated was also at a strike that birthed the environmental justice movement. And that these were the Memphis sanitation workers were going on a strike because they didn't have good wages. Many of them had to be on welfare and food stamps, and actually 2 of them were killed by a faulty truck. And the strike was about justice for the workers that make up a clean and healthy economy, clean and healthy communities. And in the Build Back Better Act, there's a lot of good provisions for laborers, for workers. I mentioned the electric vehicle tax credits, and the tax credits, they are there's requirements on those for American manufacturing and for union labor, because it's not enough to just build out more, Teslas and electric vehicles. We have to make sure that those jobs are unionized, that people are getting paid good wages, family supporting wages, as well. And so that's one really important part. The other part is, there's a civilian climate corps, as I mentioned, which is a really good pathway for union jobs for people who otherwise who would be actively excluded from the clean energy economy. And then there's a lot in terms of pollution reduction and monitoring, giving the government the actual tools to enforce what the powers they have, the regulations they have, to monitor and reduce toxic pollution in Black and Brown communities, because that's the number one predictor of whether you have a toxic facility next to you is race and not income. So there's money in there for pollution reduction. There's money to enforce the National Environmental Protection Act. There's also additional money for public transportation in there. And also, just the more that we invest in clean energy, and the more that we invest in getting rid of turning down fossil fuel infrastructure. As I mentioned, fossil fuel infrastructure is primarily in Black and Brown communities. And so we really need to wind down the fossil fuel economy, because the people who are dying first and the most and suffering the most first and the most are Black and Brown communities. And so those are some important, also buildings. So buildings, the places where we live and sources of pollution, I think maybe 16% of the U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. That's also a public health issue. So if you live in an older home, you're more likely you may use the same amount of energy, but you're going to pay more. And that's primarily, again, Black families, low-income families who are living in older houses that are not energy efficient. They're less likely to have electrified appliances. They're less likely to be ready when climate disasters strike and there's extreme heat or extreme cold. And there's money in the Build Back Better Act to put people to work in union jobs, refitting those buildings and homes. So that's another really important piece of the Build Back Better Act as well.
Wes, you've been so eloquent about why we need to get this bill passed. And so just last plug for Climate Voice. We have a campaign trying to really encourage and push climate-friendly companies, climate-responsible companies, to publicly support this incredibly important and historic legislation. So please check out, Sarah's also going to pin the tweet of our Go Time scorecard, where we have 20 large US-based companies that are not leading on this. They have not stepped up. They have not spoken loudly enough to support this legislation. And we would love all of you to tweet at them directly. We have pre-populated names of their executives, board members, and others who are responsible for those decisions. So check out our Go Time scorecard. Thanks, Andrea. Back to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you so much, Wes. We should have more conversations about that. But Katharine, did you want to jump in before we move on to Shweta on that point? And any insights from your conversations on how to navigate the climate justice topic?
I love the focus on how climate change affects all of us here and now, but it doesn't affect us equally. And those who are already marginalized, who are already disadvantaged, people who already live in low income neighborhoods where during a heat wave they can be over 10 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the wealthier neighborhoods with more trees and green space where people can afford to pay their air conditioning bills. When the floods come, people who live in the flood zone, because that's a more affordable part of the city to live in, they're more likely to be flooded, obviously. And as he alluded to, in those areas, they're more likely to have a garbage dump or a hazardous waste site because they didn't have the political power to prevent that from being put in their neighborhood. So climate change is profoundly a justice issue. And there is no way that we can tackle the injustices that plague our society and our cities today if we don't tackle climate change with it.
Thank you, Catherine, 100%. And then, of course, there's that plays out even more so globally as well. So next, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Shetta Chakraborty, who is a climate scientist and a science communicator, a climate communicator, and the president of the very exciting We Don't Have Time network, which is based on solutions in climate action, which has launched in the United States. I'm very excited to be at that DC launch. Shweta, can you share with everybody, please, your work at We Don't Have Time? And then we have another special question for you about the Don't Look Up film.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that kind introduction. Just to clarify, I'm a behavioral scientist, not a climate scientist, but I do apply behavioral science to climate. And I've been doing that for many years at this point. And Catherine, this is especially special for me tonight because Catherine was one of the first people who inspired me to really apply behavioral science to what I then realized was the priority of where we could really benefit from widespread behavioral change. And so thank you, Catherine. I took your climate weirding series and I taught it at Columbia University when I moved back to the US following my postdoc, and it was very well received. And since then, anything I do with public communications or just generally communications, I ask myself, what would Catherine say right now? Well, how would Catherine handle this conversation? And so the one thing that I've really benefited from and that I like to teach and pass on to my audiences is we have to find that common ground, whatever it is. If you can find that one thing that you have in common with somebody, because we all wear many different hats. And if you can switch the hat out, you can be really much more compassionate to the differences that you would have with that person otherwise. And you can really overcome some of that cognitive dissonance that you would otherwise experience maybe immediately while trying to present information, especially around climate, that might be perceived as something that is not within the schema of the person that you're communicating to, something that might be viewed as not part of the existing identity. So to overcome that and to successfully communicate, we have to first find that common ground and compassionately approach people who are different to us. So thank you, Catherine, because you really did inspire a lot of that for me. And Michael, it's great to see you on here and working with your colleagues on hashtag Code Red, such a critical effort that took a lot of global collaboration and was very successful. And that's really where We Don't Have Time sits as well. So it is the largest review platform on climate action. All stakeholders have some real estate on this virtual platform, from users to not-for-profits to for-profits to policymakers. If you work in climate action, you have a page, whether it's active or not. Our goal is to get every single person active on this platform. And the idea is that it's a social network, so you can engage and interact, share good ideas, scale solutions. We're trying to amplify the solutions to the climate crisis. And then it's a review platform. So the idea is those who are not doing great on advancing climate solutions are warned. We're not in the business of shaming, but rather on helping those, maybe those who have been polluting in the past, to pivot their operations to get to where we need to be to align with the science that we are all collectively experiencing of the planet warming, and to really support good action and to help those who are struggling with steps along the way to really impact society positively, not just improve operations within their organizations, but society more broadly, helping them overcome some of those challenges and some of those humps. So that's the platform. It's free to use. Please check it out. We don't have time.org. And so that is what we do. Thank you.
And Shetta, could you share with us? I just want to shout out that at the launch in DC recently. I think they had just over a million viewers. So they made it to a million of folks tuning in from around the world to hear about the launch. It was very exciting and very well done with great speakers. And with that, I have the next question for you, which is, did you watch the film Don't Look Up, which sparked a lot of dialogue about climate and whether or not we're being too catastrophic about our collective future? So what do you think popular culture contributes to the whole conversation? And as a behavioral scientist, what do you think was or wasn't effective about the film? Actually, I should probably let you say whether or not you've seen the film before I ask you all these questions.
Yes, well, I think I saw it as soon as I saw it pop up on Netflix. I had an alert set for it. It was brilliant. I recommend everybody watch it if you haven't yet. What I love most about the film is that there was someone for everyone, and it's about identifying the messaging that works for different demographics and finding the most trusted spokesperson to speak to those demographics in a way that really inspires behavioral change. And one thing I noticed, I mean, there was characters for so many different demographics in the US. But what I really appreciate about the film is they even brought in some of the scenes where they were kind of flashing across different celebrities around the world or different influencers. They brought in this one little known Bollywood celebrity, probably outside of India, whose name is Ishan Qatar. And I was just so impressed that there was that recognition that here is a true influencer that can reach the billion or so young people in India. That's one of the populations that are growing rapidly alongside China. And there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of opportunity there to reach a young audience and communicate in a way that can really develop action steps well in advance of them reaching influence. And so I really appreciated that recognition was there to communicate to these younger groups around the world. So that was something that really stood out for me that I haven't heard as part of a lot of the reviews on the movie. But overall, I thought it was really brilliant. I'd love to hear Catherine's views on it as well. So I will pass it on to Katharine to see what she thinks.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your kind words. It's so interesting because I was asked earlier today, how do you know whether your global weirding series that I did on YouTube, how do you know whether it has any impact? And I said, well, I haven't conducted any scientific studies, but I hear from people sometimes who use it. And you just showed me, I mean, what you just said, that alone is worth it because the work you're doing is amazing and you are building bridges and you're bringing people together. And that is exactly what we need to be doing on this issue. So with Don't Look Up, it did a fantastic job of showing people the first side of the coin. Why does climate change matter? The planet will survive. The question is, will human civilization? And if we do not heed the warnings of scientists, it won't. We need the other side of the coin now, though, and that is that we can do something about it. We still have time to act and we can make a difference. So I love the movie, but if I could, I think I would go back and I would make it one of those movies that has an alternate ending. Imagine if you got to the end and then it started back up again halfway through the movie. And there were people, individuals, leaders, ordinary people, the scientists too, who made different decisions. And imagine if those decisions led to a different outcome. It would be so powerful to see the contrast between those two and to see, especially from your perspective as a behavioral scientist, to see what was it that made the biggest difference. And through doing so, how can we learn how to save ourselves?
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, it was. And if you haven't seen the film, you should definitely check it out on Netflix. So thank you. We're coming up on 9 o'clock. We have about 10 to 15 more minutes. And I'd like to quickly welcome Mick Sheldrick onto the stage of the amazing global citizen, a very powerful citizen advocacy group. Mick, welcome. You recommended Saving Us, Dr. Hayhoe's book, as your number one recommended top book to read in 2022. What were your favorite takeaways from the book?
Well, thanks, Andrea. Great to be here, and thank you because this has been an amazing platform that you've created and community, bringing us all together. Look, I think from my perspective, and I've recommended Saving Us over and over again. And even though I listen to the Audible, I have a copy just to show in Zoom and WebEx conversations because it comes up so much and it's so topical. And I think from my perspective, I began listening to actually the Audible version, which is very, very good, and is only about 8 hours long. We're on the way to COP26. And then, the craziness of COP26, like everyone, I was busy. They were 12-day long days, and actually there was a moment there. One of my most visible memories of COP26 was standing in line with the thousands of others. You go in with your pass, trying to get in, and as I was there waiting in the rain, scrolling Twitter, I saw a Twitter exchange between an activist and Katharine, actually. And this activist, she was bemoaning the fact that there we were as activists all competing with one another, when in fact, rather than competing for the same platforms to have our say, we should be building our own platforms. And Katharine replied on Twitter saying exactly, and of course, that's why she prefers to spend time at Rotary clubs. And it reminded me, I better get back and listen to the rest of the book. And it was actually on the journey down from Glasgow. I had about 5 hours left, and like many of us who left Glasgow, we left with mixed emotions. And for me, it was actually very cathartic. I listened to the remainder all pretty much in that day, and I think by the end of it, though, by the time I was literally rocking up at the airport after this journey south, I was actually uplifted. And, there's much in the book I could talk about. And, even what Katharine was just talking about with, don't look up, what was the second side of the coin. And, the story that really stood out, and it was the story I literally listened to, as I remember where I was in the car rolling up to the airport, worrying about if I was going to miss this flight. But it was this story where she talks about, close to the end of the book, this gentleman coming up to her at the end of a speaking gig. And he says, basically, I listened to your advice, and I went out and started speaking to members of my community. This idea that the first thing we've got to be willing to do is talk with one another. And through that, he said, I think from memory, he had tracked something like 12,000 subsequent conversations that had spiraled off the back of his efforts that he could somehow trace. I think it was his local council who had signed on to declare a climate emergency, and that they were divesting their fossil fuels from fossil fuel investments. And I think for me, that just really sums up and brings home, the power of talking in our local spheres of influence and the change we can make. And I got on that plane and immediately rejuvenated, and also reflecting on ourselves at Global Citizen. And I was like, that's the value we provide, is to build those platforms so these conversations can take place.
And Mick, briefly, which I'm sure is going to be difficult to do, if you can share just a couple of insights from your work with Global Citizen on how you catalyze collective action through your work, so we can amplify our voices louder, so governments can hear us to spur action at the policy level.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use a specific story. I think, we're essentially a campaign organization that brings together millions of citizens around the world. And interestingly, one of the countries where we, over the last few years, have grown quite a big base. Mostly, it turns out there's a lot of Coldplay fans and Lady Gaga fans in Brazil. And one of the things, for those that don't know about us, is at the core of our DNA, we talk about pop and policy. So we try and use popular culture to mainstream these issues. But I a focus on the conversation around Brazil, because, and I think it actually is useful here when we've just been talking about, the fact that it's so easy to fall into despair with the gridlock at the national level when it seems that change is impassable, but when you look at the local level, and where decision makers through agitation at the local community level, where change is really able to begin. And, someone I think mentioned earlier on, despite having 4 years of inaction at the federal level here in the US, just the extent to which, states, cities, and businesses really drove a lot of momentum. And I think for us, we were earlier last year, we were reached out to by a group of local NGOs in Brazil. One was Rewild, which, funnily enough, works with Leonardo DiCaprio's foundation. So there's a connection there with Don't Look Up, but also this group called the Center for Environmental Peace Building. And there in Brazil, despite having a hostile national government, they wanted our help to get 6 governors from across the Amazon and the northeast of the country, to make commitments to protect nature, promote adaptation for the most vulnerable, and ultimately do what they could to come up with plans that was aligned with avoiding temperature rises of 1.5 degrees or greater. And, essentially what we did is we said, look, okay, well, let's give a platform, to these governors. Let's say if they're going to step up and be heroes in their communities, we will give them a global stage. We will acknowledge them as partners who are stepping up despite inaction at the national level. And in fact, Coldplay and Chris Martin were so inspired by these groups of activists that they even got behind it. They tweeted and they said, we're so excited, to support these causes from these local activists. And we ended up with all 6 of these governors clambering to get on board because they wanted to show what they were doing. I use this example because I think it really demonstrates that with clear and hyper-localized asks that resonates with local people, that energy, there's nothing that inspires people to take action and want to get behind something and have a bias for action than seeing others take action. And there they motivated even the biggest artists in the world to rally behind them and support. And from my perspective, I think it's instructive because, we can spend a lot of time talking about Build Back Better. And yes, that's important, but let's not lose sight of also the other areas of where change can be made. And, I finish on perhaps on the subject of Build Back Better, one plug of one story of progress to give an example. One of our partners is Delta Airlines. And, they've made a ton of progress over the last few years. And we've long said to them, look, it's important to us that, you as a company that prides itself on being net zero actually makes a commitment that is science-based. And what do I mean by having a science-based target? It's a commitment that you're going to reduce your emissions, not just net zero, because we know, I won't go into it, we know net zero can be misused. It leaves wriggle room for, offsetting and all of these sorts of concerns, but actually saying, we're going to commit ourselves to absolute emission reductions and cuts. And they went out and they did this last year, and they said, okay, we're going to do this. I think they became the 3rd airline in the world to do that. Now, of course, the struggle is, okay, how are they going to implement that? And I think one of the exciting things about Build Back Better, if it gets passed, is, Wes before was talking about tax credits, but there's a sustainable aviation fuel tax credit in there, because one of the biggest issues for many airlines will be, economic benefits and support so that, they can actually address the green premium for consumers and actually, make the switch to more sustainable sources of fuel. Because I think 90% of their fuels is from emissions come from their jet fuel. And so I think, you have all these stakeholders, airlines, others, some of the biggest companies where it's actually hard for them to do this, saying we want to do this. And I think that's what gives me hope. Regardless of what happens with Build Back Better, there will be other ways to do that, but we shouldn't lose sight of these stakeholders that are saying, what, we're going to take a leadership role here in our industries, and contribute to it. And we've still got a lot of work to do, but I think there's a lot of partners working and looking for support on what to do next.
Thank you, Mick. And that's just a testament to the success of Katharine's book, because anyone who traveled to or from COP in the middle of COVID, that was not necessarily an enjoyable experience, the actual travel itself. So be uplifted by Katharine's book is an amazing success. And with that, without further ado, I think I'd like to bring Katharine, unless you'd like to quickly respond to Mick, I wanted to get Eliza in there because she's been waiting so patiently, and I know we're reaching time here. Shall I throw to Eliza, or would you like to respond to Mick?
Yes, all I would say is, Mick, you just gave me hope. We give hope to each other when we encourage each other like that. So thank you, and I'm eager to hear from Eliza.
Thank you. And we need everybody, every sector. Eliza, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you here. Eliza Nemser from Climate Change Makers. Please tell us about your really important work mobilizing change makers and building coalitions. Eliza?
Oh, yes. Okay. I was like, oh no, my volume cut out right at that moment. Well,
Okay.
thanks so much. I'm really glad to be here. And thank you, Bill and Jennifer, for including me in the conversation. And a lot of very important ground has been covered. And I think I have two additional pieces to squeeze in to round out, at least my vision of a 2022 action agenda. And that would be one, the potential for doing political work through a climate lens, not a partisan lens. And then two, carving out the time to do this critical work. So I'm a big +1 on it just being a huge honor to be here with Dr. Hayhoe, who really inspired my pivot to a career in climate advocacy. And it was really a pivot. About 5 years ago, I was an earthquake scientist at a big AGU meeting with tens of thousands of Earth and space scientists. And I had really been feeling a tug to shift from earthquakes to work on the climate problem since I became a mom about 10 years ago. But it was at this meeting about 5 years ago that I looked around and I just had this light bulb moment. I was like, whoa, this science community is just becoming increasingly aware that we have a political problem on our hands. But there's so much reluctance here to get political because politics are icky, right? And then I realized, wait, it's the partisan element that's icky. And in fact, there's plenty of room here to get very political, to do the work of advocating for climate candidates and climate policies, but through a climate lens, using science and justice as a filter for the priorities that we take on, whether it's candidates or policies. Dr. Hayhoe mentioned this, huge segment of the American population that's worried but not activated. And certainly the Yale Center on Climate Communications has done all this polling, and they describe this willing segment. And it hit me that I'm just kind of experiencing in this science community what that reluctance might be in part, just this reluctance to get political. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to find a way to do this, really unapologetically political work through a climate lens. And I've been engaged ever since in this work independently and as a consultant with the NRDC Action Fund. And it was really thrilling to co-found the Climate Change Makers community to really create community around deep engagement with effective climate advocacy. Again, through this climate lens. And the key word is effective, because we all know that effective advocacy takes longer than a few clicks. It's actually not easy, but we can make it much more simple and accessible. And in fact, there are all these people, this willing segment, looking to go beyond clicktivism and really engage in meaningful ways. So at Climate Change Makers, the kind of cornerstone of our strategy is that we channel all of this energy and intent, and we leverage this huge power of collective action in an hour of action every week. So this is really trying to create a habit, a routine, a team sport out of civic engagement in the name of climate action. We have partnered with so many phenomenal organizations, including Evergreen Action on this call, ClimateVoice, Drawdown Labs of Project Drawdown. I see Jamie Alexander in the audience, and we're doing so much collaborative work to help amplify different priorities. And we've created these action playbooks, some of which are very straight inspired by Dr. Hayhoe. For instance, we have an entire action playbook around developing personalized talking points. We ran that playbook this morning during our hour of action, and we're going to run it again tomorrow during our action, which is at hours of action are always Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, and Thursdays at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern. And we kick off each climate priority, whether it's a candidate that we're going to advocate for or a policy, with this action of developing our personal talking points. And we literally have a shared Google Doc that we populate together. And it's really powerful. We get briefed on the issue and then we really connect to the issue. So I just want to drive home again, all of this space for doing this unapologetically and critically important political work without the lens of partisan identity. And I think that is a way to welcome so many more people into the work. And also the critical importance of carving out the time to do this work, and doing it in community in real time adds this amazing layer of accountability and community building. So I would say, the 2022 action agenda, find a community and advocate and make it a habit, really. And welcome anyone who doesn't know where to start. We actually have seasoned advocates and folks who are brand new to advocacy join us. But really, we're building a very inclusive community where we're doing this work together. So welcome everyone to join us for an hour of action. We are at it every single week. And you can also follow us on Twitter at the Climate Vote, or just join our hour of action straight from our website, climatechangemakers.org/events.
And that's exactly what I was just going to ask you. So thank you for sharing that. So energized after hearing you speak. Unapologetically political work. Shout out to Jamie, our friend who's here, and also to Lauren Blackford from the Sierra Club, who's on the stage. And with that, without further ado, I would like to pass it back to Bill to ask the final question of the evening.
Thank you, Andrea. And what an inspiring discussion. So, Katharine, we're in January, it's early in the year. Do you have a climate resolution you would encourage all of us to adopt this year?
Well, I do, and I bet you can guess what it is. I would encourage everyone to resolve to have an important conversation. Have a conversation where you work, or have a conversation with the group you're part of. Have a conversation with your kid's school, or your own school, or your city. Having those conversations knocks over the first domino in that long chain that leads us to a better future. And when you have that conversation, if you don't know how, you just heard Eliza has a handbook on and activities on how to figure that out. There's lots of resources. And when you have that conversation, share it with others, encourage and inspire them as well. Because you know what? It truly can be contagious. But for something to be contagious in a good way, it has to start. And it starts with us.
Wonderful. So, folks, get out there and talk about it at your workplace, in your neighborhood, in your household. But work to raise awareness and activate people around you.
That's right. Let's go do it. Jennifer, you want to get a last word?
Yeah, just finally, I want to thank everyone for joining us for such an extraordinary conversation. Katharine, we're all inspired I think, Bill, your mic is on. We're also inspired. Thank you for being part of this. Climate Voices is really an incredible way for us to gather and feel more inspired, feel more informed, and take action together. So I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and look out for us on Twitter Spaces for the next episode next month.
Yeah, follow Climate Voices, sign the petition, buy Katharine's book, Saving Us All. Thank you so much, everybody.